how can you tell if you have too long of a styloid and need surgery versus if they have internal jugular vein compression that can be treated by treating the neck? Great question. If neck treatments help temporarily, how can you determine if it's helping with the vestibular system versus helping that vein compression? So let's talk about what it is. So what is the styloid process? So the styloid process is kind of right back here, comes off your mastoid. The mastoid is this bone you got on the back of your head that connects to your neck. And for some people, we get this, everybody has like a little fang, a little styloid process that sticks down. And it becomes an area where you actually have some connection with some muscles that come in and around your throat, help you with speech and some different activity with moving the hyoid bone around. Okay. So what can happen though is for some people, it can become ossified. And when it becomes ossified, it gets a little bit longer. But the problem when it becomes ossified is that it can start to cause some compression on some other stuff, especially when you move your head. Now, this is the age-old question. And do you just get the scissors and clip it off? Or do you think about how the movement may be off? I can see as my movement's off that my camera's off here. So if that movement is off, we may find, so this is like the classic bow hunter syndrome. So anybody who's not familiar with that, bow hunter syndrome is this idea, obviously, when you shoot a bow, you turn your head, and as you turn your head, does that styloid compress either the vestibular, or the vertebral artery that comes into the back and the posterior circulation, or do we start to get changes where we get an effect on the carotid that comes to the front, and then we occlude them, or number 3 is do we get some compression of the internal jugular vein and it backs up into the head, right? And we talk about this all the time. And then the question is to what degree does having that styloid process in there make a difference? Now, for some people, it's going to be a surgical event, and you'll know that because nothing changes it. The tougher one is we will find all the time where we will be able to see where people will have, changes in blood supply when they turn their head. We can do things that affect the way that they move, so it makes the movement more clean, less blocked. And we see that they no longer have those cuts, but the styloid is still going to be there and longer. And then that kind of becomes the chicken or the egg question is this something that is a function of the actual, like the styloid is just too dang long and no matter what, it's going to be problematic? Or is it a function of the way I move and rotate and control the movements of my head, where maybe that styloid is actually not too long, but it's the problem with the way that we have the position of our body that allows it to compress. So the corollary to that would be, some people might say, like, this is the same thing we think about with CCI, where it's like, well, when I flex my head, it can go too far, and then that can cause an impingement on the jugular vein or the carotid or the vagus nerve or something like that. But then the secondary question would be, well, also, what if we can just improve the way that you control the kinematics of your neck so that you're not going into those distributions and not causing that type of compression? You're staying in the road, so to speak. You're not driving off into the ditch. And if you're not driving off into the ditch, then you don't have to worry about it. So there's 2 ways to think about that. Some of that's personal in terms of, number 1, what your tolerance is for surgery, right? Some people, no big deal. They don't mind. Surgery every year is good for them. And they will be more likely to go through that procedure. It may help, it may not, but then they'll solve the problem as it comes along. The other way to think about it may be related to, like, maybe you don't want surgery. You don't usually respond well to surgery, or you want to try something conservative first and see how that goes. And I tend to lean toward that in some ways because it's just like how I'm wired, but also it's easier. Like if the conservative thing doesn't work, you're not out anything. You didn't change any structure. You didn't change or break anything. And then you can always still do the surgery, but you can't do it the other way. So you can't like undo the surgery and take it back and put everything back in and say, just kidding. So I tend to kind of operate in that way where it's like, if we can do it conservatively first, awesome. If that's just not working and surgery is the way out, then we work on those things as well. So yeah, so that's kind of the thought process that you can use. But it depends on how long the styloid is. I see actually a lot of elongated styloids that are like not that long, and they actually respond really well to conservative care. Then we just keep an eye on it, and if we find that like they can keep trucking and use kind of their own body or their own kind of natural movement to be able to keep that at bay, then we just keep leaning them into that, and that can be a really useful tool. And I've also seen styloidectomies that don't work because it doesn't change the movement parameter, so they pop the styloid out, may cause a different problem. We've seen that. But then also we just see other things with motion of the neck that were actually the problem. So it can go both ways.